Thank you so much, Marina. And speaking of technical difficulties, I think that Cole actually got disconnected, so he'll be trying to rejoin. I'll still run through this just very brief introduction that I have. So just backing up, so I'm Alexandra, as Marina said. I'm the Senior Manager of Content Marketing and Storytelling here at MovingWorlds. And we work with a lot of talented professionals who know they want more purpose and impact in their work, but aren't sure exactly where to start. So our goal in this webinar is really to deliver some concrete insights and methods to support you in taking that first step towards more meaningful work. Now, as I mentioned, while we're waiting for Cole to get the presentation set back up, I'll still run through this minus slides. I'll be as brief as I can. So before I pass it over to Cole to kick us off, just want to give you a quick overview of who we are and what we do here at MovingWorlds. Oh, perfect, he's back. So Cole, you can head to the next slide. So MovingWorlds is a global platform empowering people and organizations across all sectors to scale world-changing ideas. Go to the next slide, Cole. Our programs, so we do that through programs that support individuals, social enterprises, and corporations in driving transformative change to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we support professionals in finding more purpose in their work and making an impact in their careers through the MovingWorlds Institute Global Fellowship Program. We also support social enterprises with capacity building skilled volunteers to help them overcome any challenge, as well as corporate business-to-business connections through our S-Grid program. And finally, we support corporations like Microsoft, SAP, in building social impact programs that develop employees while creating social good. Next slide, please. So at the end of the day, we measure our success in terms of the social impact we're creating in conjunction with our partners and global community. So on our website, you can find our Living Impact Report, which has up-to-date statistics on things like top SDGs impacted, average length of project, and things like that, where you can get a better idea of this cumulative impact of this pretty cool thing that we're building. Next slide, please. Okay, last MovingWorlds plug, I promise. Whether you're an individual professional or a social entrepreneur or just a supporter, our goal is to share information that empowers you to lead positive change from wherever you are. So check our website, movingworlds.org. We share a lot of insights, best practices, case studies, and cool free events like this. So head there for more information about future opportunities. You can go to the next slide. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's featured guest, our very own Cole Huber. Cole is a coach, facilitator, and learning designer interested in the future of education, and he currently serves as the director of the MovingWorlds Institute, a global learning community empowering professionals to use their skills to increase social and environmental impact. Cole is also part of the core faculty at the Grand Challenges Impact Lab at the University of Washington. So without further ado, I will pass it over to my colleague, Cole.
Please. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Just to confirm, audio is working. We had a little GoToWebinar issues at the beginning, but
yes, we're all good now.
Okay, awesome. Well, before I dive in, I would like to begin by acknowledging the land that I'm calling in from. The land that I live on is within the Aboriginal territory of the people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. The Suquamish are expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers who live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So just wanted to bring that into the space and offer some gratitude. And speaking of gratitude, I'm really grateful to get to be joining you all. This is a conversation that I really, I have it all the time, but I really appreciate any opportunity to get to talk to people who are thinking about, in some way or another, building upon using their skills for greater impact in the world. This is something that we focus on at MovingWorlds, and specifically in the MovingWorlds Institute, which Alexandra had mentioned, which is our learning community, our program for people in career transition who To date, I believe we've had people from over 52 different countries. So yeah, it's one of my greatest honors in my work to get to work with this amazingly diverse network of people, all trying to find better ways to use their skills for impact. And, for anyone out there who is in this moment, I think that there's a deep acknowledgement that there are so many needs, but there's also so many assets out there. There's so many opportunities to have an impact. And it's a really personal journey. Like, it's not only understanding systems and building technical skills, but it's also spending some time learning about yourself, prioritizing what fulfills you, what makes you feel like you're coming alive, what really maximizes your strengths as you think about next steps in advancing your impact career. And maybe the last thing I'll say on that before diving into some of the tools that we find most helpful is that for us, there's so many challenges out there in the world, but we think that one of the biggest ones is having sustainable impact careers. And when I say sustainable, I don't mean it in the sense of like a product sustainability or environmental sustainability. I literally mean, how can you design a career that you can spend the most years in your life contributing to solving some of the world's most intractable problems? Like, there are many issues out in the world, and burnout, I think, is one that we need to acknowledge as one of the greatest and one of the biggest enemies of people doing impactful work. And so this process that we propose takes some of our favorite methods from design thinking and puts you into a reflection on how you can not only find work opportunities that are a fit for your skills, but also are going to help you sustain your energy, are going to help you feel fulfilled, and really set you up for kind of that longer term career arc, working towards more meaningful social and environmental impact. So to introduce, I'm guessing that some of you are familiar with design thinking, and for others, it may just be a buzzword you're hearing all the time now. So I'm going to break it down and talk a little bit about how we use design thinking as a resource to not only solve problems out in the world, but also to think about our own career, our own transition. And Alexandra and others, please feel free to chime in if anyone's having any questions in the chat. I'd love to take interruptions or questions at any time. So to introduce and kind of ground us all in the same place, what is design thinking? At its core, design thinking is a process to develop solutions. And the goal is to develop relevant solutions. Like, we don't want to build products that at the end of the day, no one wants to buy and no one wants to use. And we also don't want to move into a career that isn't going to fulfill us, isn't going to provide for our basic needs, isn't going to be the highest expression of our skills. So we use design thinking for that as well. So design thinking all starts with the empathize phase. It's about learning about your audience. And this could be a community you're working with. This could be yourself. Like, for the purpose of today's webinar, we're going to think about this audience as you. Once you've built an understanding and you've truly listened, we get into the phase called define. Define is all about asking the right questions and defining the right problem. So often we set out, we put all this energy and work and time into approaching something only to realize that we weren't even actually solving the real problem. Maybe we were just putting a Band-Aid on something that was a far deeper thing. So once we've actually done the work, and honestly, these two phases are really challenging and often they get skipped. And that's why it's so important to spend the time, whether you are designing a sanitation system or you're thinking about your career transition. But once we've empathized and once we've defined the right problem, we get to move into ideating. And this is often where people start. Brainstorms can be really fun, ideating, thinking about all these different possibilities, but it's only done correctly when you've actually done your homework leading up to it. So once we've empathized, once we've defined, we get into ideate, where we come up with a bunch of different ideas, kind of sky's the limit. We let ourselves cast a wide net and spread it out. And we go from there to actually start to refine, start to build representations or prototypes. And prototypes are one of these terms too that I think can be a buzzword, where I'd say it's easy just to think about prototypes as what's something that you could build a representation of, that you don't need to have a huge budget. You don't need to make a gigantic commitment. You don't need to quit your job. You don't need to start a new one you're unsure of. A prototype is something that you can put out into the world and get some immediate feedback on. And we'll talk a lot more about some great tools that we see for doing that. One example, just to make it a little bit more real, is MovingWorlds years ago was founded as a matching platform. So we connected skilled professionals with social enterprises all around the world who had capacity gaps, things that they needed support on. And we allowed these skilled professionals to work as pro bono consultants, or what we call experteers, with a social enterprise, kind of helping them to solve some kind of problem. But in doing so, they also kind of got to prototype working in a certain way that maybe they'd never done before. This helped them to build their resume. This helped them to realize, like, hey, working on this kind of project, I actually enjoy it. Or, you know what? I assumed I was going to like doing this type of thing. I actually don't. Volunteering can be an amazing way to actually prototype thinking about and envisioning new career directions. And so after you prototype and after you really start to refine and get feedback on something, it's time to test. So get more user feedback and keep kind of building new iterations that get more and more real and have more and more investment of time, money, resources, energy before you get to your next thing. And one other note to put on this is not a process you do once. Like ideally, these are things that you're going back to again and again. So it's not like we get to the test phase, we've got our dream career and we never have to revisit this. You're likely going to be going back to this again and again, and that's fine. Like, I think that, you know, in our educational systems, we often think about learning as something that stops when you're done with your undergraduate or your master's or your PhD, depending on how far you go. But learning truly is something that needs to be lifelong. And we think that design thinking is a great tool to kind of keep learning, keep evolving the way you're thinking about problems. And so that's design thinking. Another tool that we combine is human-centered design. Another idea that you all may have heard of. And we look to human-centered design as a mindset that can kind of overlay with design thinking. And I'll talk a little bit more about that overlay in a moment. So the most important things about human-centered design, first off, is that it's about centering the user. So if you're using this as a tool out in community, it's about knowing that often the answers to the world's greatest problems, they live with the people experiencing them. In this case, that's you. You're the person in this transition. But on top of those values in human-centered design, it's also got some mindsets that help you to kind of stay on track and really not rush ahead. Like, so much of this is spending the time, doing the reflection, which is why we think, you know, learning communities like our institute and some of our other kind of communities of practice can be a great way to be in this. But there's so many out there. You're in one right now. Charity Village is an example of a community of practice, a learning community to do this work. And so the phases of human-centered design that we find most important are inspiration, ideation, and implementation. And I'll give some more examples of this in a moment, but just as a quick rundown of how these phases go. In inspiration, it's all about casting a wide net, what they call divergent thinking. No stupid ideas, all directions are worth exploring. Ask a lot of questions, network with a lot of people. Don't feel like you've got anything decided, because if you do, you'll sometimes miss out on some magical opportunities. So once you've really spent time in the inspiration phase, it's time to move on to ideation. Ideation is converging. Ideation is coming back, starting to see themes, patterns, things that emerged as you were casting a wide net, and beginning to filter. So finding those themes, zeroing in on big ideas that are popping up, and further refining. So once you've gotten to those themes, it's time to take those patterns you're recognizing, turn them into prototypes, and actually start getting feedback on them. So you're going to take these ideas out, you're going to test them, you're going to get feedback. You're going to do a thing like volunteer on a project in an organization you've never worked in. You're going to have a bunch of conversations with people talking about what you're trying to do and see what their feedback is. And once you do that, you get a lot of information, you get new feedback, and you move into implementation. And implementation is about taking everything you've learned in the past stages and starting to build something, starting to take next steps. And there's all kinds of tools and resources that help you frame these different activities to move forward. And so at MovingWorlds, we combine design thinking and human-centered design into what we call social enterprise thinking. And this can be used if you're working in a social enterprise, a not-for-profit, government agency, a corporate program that's for impact, but it can also be used as you're thinking about your own for impact career. We think that overlaying these two methodologies together not only give you specific activities, but also phases to kind of embody. So you're gonna want to learn about your audience, and you're gonna want to stay in that inspiration phase for as long as you can before you start moving into ideation. Like giving all these parts due time is one of the things that we find to be most powerful. So without further ado, I'd love to share some examples. So what I'm gonna do is share out a tool called Mural. And actually, Alexandra, if you could share that out to the group. We're going to use this code right now. Thank you. So we're going to use this collaborative workstation in Mural, which is like a digital whiteboard for any of you who have not used this before, as a way for us to kind of experience some of these different tools and resources. So share my screen again. Looks like we're live. Everything's working. Cool. So as you're starting to jump in there, so you click the link that my colleague Alexandra added. Looks like we're getting some people in there. So one thing I will note is in Mural, there's some controls. So you can follow along on my screen, or you can also go down to here. And one really crucial feature are these zoom settings. So you click on this, and you can choose how are you navigating through this mural. Are you on a trackpad, usually like a built-in thing to your computer? Are you using a mouse? And it can give you some ways for zooming in, zooming out. So make sure to go in there and get all set up. It looks like we got a lot of activity. Always super fun to actually get some interactivity.
Yeah. One other helpful tip I remember when I was new to Mural, that, as Cole mentioned, that kind of trackpad in the bottom right of the screen, there's a little hand that almost looks like a Mickey Mouse glove. If you click on that, it brings you into what's called move mode, where you can use your mouse to move around to different places without actually adding anything or moving any cards. So yeah, it looks like the little icon is up next to it. So that move mode, selecting and deselecting it can also be helpful as you navigate around.
Cool. Thanks, Alexandra. I'm seeing a bunch of activity. So for now, folks, if you can leave the stickies where we're at, but we'll get a chance to play around with those a little bit more. But fun to see everyone coming in. I'm going to first share some examples, and this is something that we'll share with you all at the end of the webinar that you can use, going forward. So we've got direct links. So what we did is we pulled out some of our favorite tools from the design thinking phases that allow people, and again, if folks could try not to grab these and move them around, I know it can be a little hard as you're getting into Mural. But I'm going to start over here in Empathize. So these are some of our favorite tools with links to them, to activities from all different kinds of industry leaders in our network who've proposed great resources for how you can use design thinking in different phases of your career transition. And I'll say again, I love interruptions, I love questions, so please chime in the chat if there's anything that you need clarification on or an example you'd like to call out. So starting in Empathize. So in Empathize, this is about getting better understanding of where you're at. Like often I find whatever it is, could be big life decisions like buying a house, renting a new place, getting into a relationship, or moving into a career. We often don't reflect enough on our transitions. So we've got an activity right here that helps you to really ground and think about, where am I at right now? Not just where am I trying to go, but where am I at right now? So another one is kind of managing your energy, thinking about like, how is your energy flowing? What are the different things that you are considering? What are things that you're feeling energy around, that you're maybe feeling a little drained on, like all different kinds of areas that you need to engage with. all the way up to the idea of what would your ideal day look like? Like, how could you even imagine it before you think about moving into a new career? Like, what would even a good day look like in work? Some other things that can be great is thinking about a budget, thinking about the practical aspects. Like, often these career changes are not just about like landing the dream job. It's also about getting your house in order and finding ways to make sure that you've kind of scanned not only the ecosystem you're exploring, but your own life to figure out what's most important to you right now. So once you've done that, once you've had a chance to empathize with yourself, you move into define. Define is all about, again, defining the problem, framing it effectively. Some things that can be really helpful on here is, first off, what are your knowns and unknowns? And again, reminder, there's links on all these little sticky notes that you can go down and you can see these activities. Like, what are things that you are certain? Like, what's a deal breaker for your next career transition? Where are you going to be in a year? What are the things you know? What are the things you don't know? What are the risks you're willing to take? What are the risks that you don't have tolerance for? Like, this is really, really important. What are the causes that you're interested in impacting? So instead of, thinking about these are my dream organizations that I want to work with forever, like, what are the things that you want to do? Like, what are your impact goals? A tool that we really love that we do not only in our fellowship, but across all of our programs is called making a purpose statement. So we use the imperative purpose assessment, some of you may be familiar with, and it's an assessment that you take to get a better understanding of how you find fulfillment at work. But you don't even need to take this assessment to be able to do this. All you need to do is think about writing out a statement that talks about how you get fulfilled by using your skills in impact organizations. Have conversations with people. Start to figure out how people are responding to it, how people are reacting to it. Like, do these little prototypes as you go to make sure that you're getting feedback. And then one other great thing that can help you in this phase of like defining the move, defining the problem, what you're trying to address is tapping into mentorship and networking. Like, one of the things that we emphasize most in all of our programs is connecting with others, doing this in community, and finding ways to get supported. Like, being in community through these hard transitions is absolutely invaluable. So something to think about. And we've got a tip here for, even if you're not a part of a formal learning community, you could create something like a mastermind group as a way to build on and get feedback from other people on the ideas that you're coming out with. So once you've defined the real problem, once you've really addressed kind of where you're at, what's the shift you're trying to make, what's the challenge you're trying to address, it's then time to ideate. And so again, this is the time when you've done your homework, you've put in the hard work of empathizing and defining the right problem. Now it's time to think about what are the opportunities out there. And this can look like all different kinds of things. One really fun one that some of you may be familiar with comes from the authors of the book Designing Your Life. It's called an Odyssey plan, where you envision 3 different scenarios for what the next 5 years of your life could be like. One could be really similar to your career. So I'd say one for me, like it could be, I want to facilitate and teach, but maybe just in a different organization. Another one could be, I do coaching, but it's not the sole part of what I do. Maybe another plan would be, I want to go solely into coaching people, and I could write out a 5-year plan for that. And then it asks you to do one that's a little bit more kind of out in left field, a little bit more out there. Maybe I want to become a rock star. Maybe I've always, played on the guitar, but I've realized like this is something that I would be so passionate about. What would it look like if I actually did that? And you can have all different kinds of examples, but it's just about the imagining. It's about coming up with different ideas. You can also do this through making an opportunity grid. Opportunity grids are something where you're analyzing what are different opportunities, what are deal breakers, what are must-haves, what are things you need to know, what are parts of the people, the network, the resources that you're most interested in. Another great one that we love, in the Institute, in our programs, we really emphasize that asking questions can often be just as important or more important than coming up with ideas. And so we tap into a practice called framestorming. And framestorming is all about generating as many questions as possible. So maybe your ideation phase actually is about thinking, what are the biggest questions I have about places that I could find fulfillment in the social impact space? that I still want to get answered. And you can go from those questions, take them out into the world, and start having conversations using things like selecting conversation starters to make it happen. And then finally, we love systems thinking. We love system mapping. And this can be used to understand how to make a certain ecosystem that you're a part of healthier. It can also be a way of thinking about what's a role that you could have within some kind of social impact ecosystem that you're interested in. Trying to go through the activity of mapping it can often help you get more clarity on it. So just another tool that you can use to make that happen. So I'll pause right here as we've gotten through the first three of these. Any questions that are coming up for people? Any areas you'd like to go a little bit deeper on?
Paul, could you repeat the name of the book that you referenced? You had a question come through.
Exactly. I'm trying to think if I have a copy near me that I could hold up. Might not in reach. The book is called Designing Your Life, and I'll mention a couple other great books that we really love that inspired some of these resources. But yeah, Designing Your Life was a book based off the most popular course taught at Stanford University for undergrads. And the whole idea was, how could you use human-centered design and design thinking principles to ask questions about how you can find fulfillment, happiness, joy, and connection in your life decisions. So hopefully that helped. Any other questions that are coming up?
I think there was another question about the assessment, but I believe you were talking about the imperative purpose assessment, right, Cole?
Yep, that's correct. Yep, so our friends over at Imperative, they have worked to create the largest assessment in the world related to how people find fulfillment at work. And so again, this assessment is often behind kind of paywalls at companies or within fellowships like ours, but we do have a lot of great free resources, and we'll reference a bunch of other resources we have for people who are making career transitions on our blog, and we have one specifically about kind of understanding your purpose as a way to find greater connections in the impact space. So definitely plug for the MovingWorlds blog. We love writing and kind of making these resources available for free to people, so more people can get out there and use them to make their transitions.
Cool. Another good question just came through asking, is this a linear process, or could you be going back and forth throughout these stages as things pop up? I know you'll have something good to say on that.
Yeah, great question. And I think it taps into one of the most important pieces of this. So I'll share again the image of the design thinking process just to kind of further ground us in that. Just confirm everyone. See? Okay, cool, looking good. So yeah, absolutely.
We're still looking at the mural. Oh, there it is. Oh. Okay, sorry, I must be on a delay.
We're good. Oh, okay, all good. Looks like GoToWebinar. Just need some coffee this morning. Moving a little slow. So design thinking, like I said, is not something that you're going to do once. You're going to find your dream career, and then you're going to throw away all your design thinking books. You're going to chuck this mural. Design thinking is not only something that you're going to do again and again, but within one design thinking process, you often will loop back. So as an example, maybe you have empathized, and we'll use the career example, but this also applies to community work and doing human-centered design work out in the social impact ecosystem. But we'll use kind of you as the audience. So say you've scanned, you've reflected, you've realized these are risks that I'm willing to take. These are deal breakers, non-negotiables. You've defined your questions, like you've thought about, hey, this is the challenge I'm really trying to solve. I want to find a job that's in this field where I have this kind of autonomy, this kind of job structure, this kind of compensation. This is the challenge I'm trying to approach. But then you get to Ideate and you're brainstorming all these different ideas. You're having a bunch of great conversations with people. And through one of those conversations, you get introduced to something you never even knew about, like a whole different kind of role, a whole different kind of career path, a whole different type of impact that you were completely unaware of. It makes you go back to the drawing board. So you could then go from Ideate back to Empathize and think again, reflect like, okay, so there's this whole new area of the impact ecosystem I had no idea about. And there's some considerations to make. Maybe it means a different kind of compensation. Maybe it means that you would potentially have to go back to school to get a different advanced degree to be able to do it. It's not to say that these are blockers, these are things you don't want to do, but you need to think about it again. So then you need to go back, resonate with yourself again, go through define, try to make sure that you're asking the right questions before getting back to ideate again. So that could just be one example. I'll pause there. Does that help?
I think that's very helpful, and it feeds into a question that just came through about questions, ironically. And so this person says, you know, you talk about asking the right questions, and that was the note you just finished on as well. And this person is wondering, how can we make sure we're asking the right people the right questions? I imagine this connects to networking, but as a recent COVID grad, I feel kind of lost in that regard. So just wondering if you could speak to that, because in my experience, the questions, obviously the define part is all about sharpening those questions, but I think getting outside information, whether it's talking to mentors or interviewing people in jobs that potentially seem interesting, questions will come up in more than one stage, but I think as long as you have done the work to empathize and define, it'll kind of help point you in the direction of what hypothesis am I going to validate next. And that can help direct you to what kind of person do I need to connect with to get this information. Is that pretty accurate from your end, Cole?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. First off, Alexandra's a pro, so you all are lucky to have her here to jump in on this. This is work that we're in all the time, and thank you for that. That's a great recommendation. I'll also say there's some tools throughout the different design thinking modules that I shared. This is one from the Mural that comes from our friend Jenny Blake, who's the author of a great book on transitions, which I'll mention again, called Pivot. The whole book is about being in transition. And so you can use an activity like knowns and unknowns to think about, like, okay, what do I know related to where I want to be, my location, my finances, projects, people, lifestyle, and you come up with some questions for this. Maybe you realize, like, so you say, hey, I want to work at a frontline service-based not-for-profit, but I don't really know what the lifestyle is like. I have a guess, I have some assumptions, but I probably need to go interview someone in this role so I can get a better understanding of what it's actually like. You generate a ton of questions by laying out what you know, what you don't know. Another thing that we find again and again, a industry leader in our network, a behavioral scientist named Dan Gilbert, he talks about this illusion where we believe that other people's experiences can't tell us that much about our own. We believe that we're super unique. And the research has shown again and again that although we are unique, we are our own, beautiful individual snowflakes. We're all different in many ways. There's a lot of things that we share in common. And so if you're interested, say for instance, with that same example about working at a frontline service-based not-for-profit, and you want to learn about the lifestyle, and you have maybe some concerns about, burnout, overwork, compensation, and you talk to someone doing that work and they tell you, yeah, I'm burned out, I'm overworked, I'm poorly compensated, it's good to listen to them. It's not to say that every organization is going to be the same, but just as kind of a reminder, as you're coming up with these questions, it can be really important to listen to the answers too. Oh, go for it, Alexandra, please.
Thank you. Apologies if I'm taking us on a little bit of a diversion, but a question just came up that I think I can help answer. So this goes back to the slide about human-centered design, and this person was asking for more clarity around the diverging and converging that happens within those stages. So the way I think about it is, I don't know if you've ever heard that expression, fall in love with the problem, not your solution to it. And so I think where that diverge and converge, what that means within the context of individual phases of that process, when you're diverging, it's not about one idea and sticking to it and this is the hill I'm willing to die on. Diverging is like, what are all the different potential ways that this could work, even if they're completely different. It's kind of let yourself brainstorm and ask those what if questions. And so in this context, converge means basically narrowing down that big ambitious list that you created in the diverge phase. So although human-centered design is divided into these three three phases, the inspiration, ideation, and implementation. Within each phase, you kind of start big, diverge, and then kind of bring it back in, pare it down, converge. And then for the next phase, okay, diverge. What are all the different ways we could do this? Let's converge around the one we choose and then commit to that.
Yep, perfect explanation. Cool. Any other questions before we move on and share a little bit on prototyping?
Sure. Just one person was asking, will that pivot template be available that you were just sharing? And just to reiterate, we will be sharing a link to this mural board with everyone on the call today. And so you'll be able to go back into it at your leisure and click on those linked cards. Again, you just click in the bottom right of the card and it will open a new tab in your browser with the resource that's attached.
And another shout out on that, Pivot is a great example. So Jenny Blake, the author of Pivot, so you can get the book. It's been out for a while and you can get very affordable copies of it or go to your local library to grab one. But she also has made available all these free templates for career changers. So the Pivot website is just a wealth of information similar to our blog. So I would look out there. There's a lot of people investing in kind of supporting as many people as possible in making these pivots into impact work. So I'll last touch on the prototype phase. So just again to ground us, so we've empathized, zoomed out a little far. We've empathized, we've kind of built some understanding with ourselves, we've defined the right problem, we've started to ideate, and from the ideation, we've come up with a bunch of ideas. Now it's time to actually test them. It's time to give feedback. So in the same way, we don't want to design a product that we actually don't know if anyone wants to use. Segway scooters, great example of something that probably should have been prototyped, but ended up being one of the worst business nightmares ever because it was built by people who just assumed all users are wealthy people like them who have similar gigantic properties that they're going to cruise around without actually getting real people to test them and say, you know what, I don't actually want to pay $10,000 for this thing that is not a car and is not as efficient as it. We make mistakes like the Segway scooter in our own lives all the time. And that's why prototypes can be a great way to discover the times that we're wrong, but to not have these huge consequences. Like, it's okay to be wrong. It is okay to fail as long as we're learning and as long as we're setting ourselves up so the failure doesn't cause us pain in a huge way. So prototypes are all about kind of how you can get out there, test things out before you are actually going to do it and invest the time. So these resources, yeah, go for it.
Sorry to interrupt, Cole. I just think that's such an important point that's worth kind of, if you excuse my business jargon, worth double clicking on and even in my career at MovingWorlds, coming from a corporate background into this environment, it was a shift for me as well of basically reframing failure. I think in school and in certain corporate environments, you don't have the option to fail. If you fail, it's like almost like a value judgment on you if it's not done perfectly. But what I think is so kind of liberating and exciting about this kind of hypothesis-driven development model is that failure, really, it's learning. So even as Cole mentioned in a previous example of, volunteering with a nonprofit that seems aligned with what you might like to make sure it's really a good fit before you make the change for real. Whether what you learn from that is, yes, I was right, I love this environment, this is great, or whether you learn, okay, way too much bureaucracy, like this isn't for me, you're still making forward progress. And so I think that's what's so wonderful about prototyping is that failure, it kind of takes the sting out of it because either way, you're learning something that will help you adjust your plan a little bit and try the next thing. And you're still bit by bit getting closer to your goal.
Yeah, totally well said. The last thing I'll say on these prototype resources is they live in some different areas. So one, like Alexandra said, is if you want to learn about how your skill can be expressed in an impact org, why not try volunteering with them? But do it in a strategic way. I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that there's volunteering that is about just making the volunteer feel good. There's volunteering that's impactful. And there's also volunteering that's both impactful and leads to learning for the volunteer. So we're really proponents of skill-based volunteering, what we call experteering, as a way of testing out what would it be like to actually use that skill on a daily basis. You might find that you really love it. You might find you don't enjoy it. We've seen some interesting examples where we've had people who had a deep skill that they used in, say, the corporate world, the government world. And their whole idea was, hey, I just need to take this skill to the nonprofit world, to the social enterprise world. But they realized after working, they're like, you know what? The same thing I hated about doing that skill at X company, I also hate doing in this nonprofit. Just because I've changed the scenery doesn't mean that I enjoy this. And we've seen the opposite of that too, but it's all about testing it out. So there's the ways of testing it, and there's also the ways of kind of framing your prototype. You know, what's your transition narrative? What's your launch timing checklist? This is an idea from Pivot about thinking, okay, when are the points when I'm going to know from a financial perspective, from a time perspective, from a family support perspective, because we all have these full lives. When is it the right time to make the move? So all different kinds of ways that you can prototype to more effectively manage that transition. So to make this more real, what we'd love to do is take a example from the audience on a transition, a social impact career transition that one of you is currently in, struggling with, having questions around. So any brave soul, if you'd be willing to put in the chat, describe a little bit about what your transition is, and then we as a group can go through and try to pick some of these tools we have. We can suggest some new ones that come to mind based off these different phases. And maybe this one lucky soul, you'll get a little free career coaching out of this. I'll give a moment to see if any come through. And if not, we've also got a bunch of examples that we see all the time in our communities.
Awesome. And just in the meantime, I saw another question come through about if we could repeat one more time just how to access the resources. So all you need to do, if they're too small, you can just kind of zoom in with that control panel on the bottom right. And then you'll just click in the lower right hand corner of the card. There's a little link. You can barely see it. It's like a little white rectangle in the bottom right of each individual sticky. When you click that, it should open up the resource that's attached in a new tab in your browser.
Cool. Alexandra, any other questions or any challenges folks wanna share?
I'm not seeing anything. Let's see. Oh, here's one. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking through this. So this person is doing design, is a design and construction project assistant that's interested in getting more involved with sports and the outdoors. And then another person said, as a Black female, I'm leaning in deeply to the DEI and social justice space, but it's not what I'm doing in my current role, but I want to incorporate more of it. So those might be.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. With the person who had the question around DEI, if it's something that they're willing to share in the chat, if they could maybe just write a couple words about what the kind of current work that they do is, so we can have that context. If for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable sharing that, that's fine too. We can also just go with the
make a hypothetical. Okay, let's give it just 1 second. See if we get some more information here.
And doesn't have to be super detailed. It could just be, you know, accounting, marketing, whatever it is.
Okay, great. So she's currently working in partnerships and engagement for a nonprofit.
Okay. Yeah, so this is another great example too. So often people assume about our programs, they're like, okay, so you're a bunch of people who worked at a corporation and you just help people get into nonprofits. Totally not the case. We have people from all sectors. Not only do we have the amazing diversity of 52 different countries that have been a part of our program, we also get people from government, private sector, not-for-profit, social enterprise. Like, we all make transitions. It's not just a one-way thing. So this is a fantastic example. So we've got our brave contributor who works in partnerships at a nonprofit and wants to move into doing more DEI work. And for the purposes of our activity, we can assume that this could mean DEI work within that current organization. Maybe it could mean doing it somewhere else, like in a place that's more focused. We can just imagine that together. So what we're gonna do is we're going to fill in these boxes, so these open boxes, and you're gonna do that by one, you can go up here, and if you see one of these activities that you think like resonates with you and would be a great one, you can pick it up, you can drag it down into Empathize, and we'll build out a little, like we'll do some team coaching here. This is maybe world record for amount of coaches to one person. So we got 270 coaches for one person. That's a pretty good ratio, a lot of support. You can also go down here, and in the color corresponding ones, you can just write an idea, something that like maybe you thought of, or maybe you think they should try. And one Mural thing that we can note here is if you just double click on a sticky, you can start writing, like maybe interview a DEI expert in your network. Could be an example. I'm also going to learn how to spell network, I promise. And then you grab this and you take it up to Empathize. So you can just go in here, you can double click, and if you double click, you'll create a sticky, and then you can just start writing on there as well. So let's just give a moment. So as a reminder, Alexander, could you remind the audience one more time the challenge that we're approaching, and then folks can start and Empathize?
Absolutely. So for our example here, we have a professional who is currently working in partnerships and engagement for a nonprofit, but she's very interested in leaning more into the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice space. She doesn't do a lot of it in her current role, but wants to bring more of that lens to her work.
Awesome. Thank you again, Brave Soul, for sharing that. And also thank you everyone for jumping in. This makes it so much more fun when we get a lot of interactivity. So as a reminder, we're in Empathize right now. We're in the inspiration phase. We're both, casting a wide net, and we're also trying to reflect. We're trying to empathize with ourselves, build better understanding about our own needs, our own direction, where we're trying to go before we actually get into some of that more career planning. So I'll give a moment, but yeah, keep putting these in here. Y'all are becoming Mural experts as we watch. Cool. Okay, so I'll give about 30 more seconds before we move on to the next one. I'll put 30-second timer on the clock. Okay. So you see a little timer in the top. When you hear the sound of a cello, it means time is up.
I'm just echoing what Cole said, but I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and willingness to jump in that people are putting in. There's some great suggestions here already.
Cool. So maybe write down that last beautiful thought. Cool. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for these wonderful ideas. One thing I'll note is, I think some people have put some ideas that are fantastic ones that may live a little later on in the process, and that's okay. We'll just move those around too, just to get some more clarity about the different phases. So one thing here that I think is a great one from the Empathize phase is like, before anything, like even assessing the openness of DEI in your company. Like this maybe starts to live in the realm of defining the problem, but I think just getting a basic understanding, kind of a temperature check, could be really helpful. Another one is like reflecting, like what industry, if you were imagining, would you even want to provide DEI solutions in? That's another great one. Some ones here are like reading about things, kind of connecting to newsletters, doing all these different things out there that help you to kind of reflect yourself. Someone had also put cultivating healthy habits, like absolutely, especially with DEI. And as a person of color working in DEI, like there's a big personal component. You've got to be a great gatekeeper of your own energy and work that's happening. So Cool. Someone said reflect on purpose drivers. Someone who's familiar with the imperative purpose assessment,
That was me.
maybe a. Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, what these are all about is where do you find fulfillment? Where do you find meaning? And those are great places to begin. So we'll go back, and after the webinar, we'll move things around and put them in what we think are the most appropriate phases. But for right now, these are great. And I'll emphasize again, it's about the reflection. This phase is about gaining more understanding with yourself about why you want to get into this work. Why is it meaningful to you? Why is it important? And how are you going to use that information to guide you to what's next? Okay, so assuming we built an understanding with ourselves, we're now going to get into the phase of defining. Like, what are the questions we need to ask? What are the challenges that this person could face in doing this work? Yeah, great question that someone moved over from Empathize. That does your city you live in offer opportunities you could work in to be more useful in another space? Yeah, great questions. Like, this is the phase for questions and sharpening questions, defining the problem, defining the challenge. So let's give about a minute. I'll give about a minute for people to go in there. So as a reminder, again, you can either grab from the define stage up here, just pull these stickies down if you see one that you think would be great for this person, or you can double click in here, or you can grab one of these stickies down in the suggestions for our example section. So let's fill on in the define part. Okay, we got 30 seconds left. Nice. Looks like people are getting the hang of this process, but they're bringing over some ones from Empathize that could be better in define. You're nailing it. I love it. Okay, so thank you, everyone. So people had said things like, okay, what are your impact goals? What are your knowns versus unknowns related to this transition? Like, do you know where you're going to be in a year? Do you know what kind of money you need to earn? Do you know what kinds of things that you are looking to do? What type of Oh yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think that knowns versus unknowns kind of connects back to that question someone had earlier of how do you know you're asking the right people the right questions? If you map out sort of, okay, this is what I know, these are the gaps I need to fill, that can almost be kind of a compass of, okay, it leads to the next question of what kind of person has the information that can help me fill this gap.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great one. And the last thing I'll say in this, and I think a lot of people are putting this, is how do you actually want to help? What kind of work do you want to do? What openness is there in the city, in the company that you're at? What kind of company would you want to work in? Not only can I do DEI, but like great questions here of like, could be related to pay, could be related to work environment, all different kinds of stuff that you're then going to be able to go out, ask questions, and move into ideation. So just in kind of acknowledgement that we're running out of time, I'm going to move on to Ideate. So at this point, you've done your homework. Empathy and define are by far the hardest parts. Ideate is when you just get to think big. So brainstorm ideas, no holds barred, go for it. What are some ideas this person could think about for landing in a DEI role or prepping themselves for moving into a DEI role that will really, really be meaningful to them? Okay, seeing some great stuff coming up here. I'm going to give 30 seconds on the clock. Awesome. Good stuff coming in. Okay, 10 seconds left. Cool. So these are fantastic. So one idea, get involved with the board of directors. Maybe there's some volunteer organization you could serve on that not only are you going to build your network, you're going to be able to serve and learn about how you like that service, but also build your brand in the process. Like a lot of people said volunteering. I think that's some great advice. Are there colleagues you could talk to? Is there a way that you could think about, okay, what's my actual budget for this transition? Fantastic. These are great stuff. Like, what are ideas? And so on our last one for prototype, the way we like to think about prototype sometimes is, what is something that you could create in 2 weeks that you could get out in the world and get really valuable feedback on, that you don't have to jump, you don't have to quit your job, you don't have to land in a new one doing a DEI role. What's something in the next 2 weeks that this person could try out to actually move forward and take this idea one step closer to their dream job in DEI, or what they assume may be their dream job in DEI? They may discover through this process this isn't actually where they want to work, and that's okay too. We just want to discover that earlier. Ooh, these are great. I'm already seeing some good ones. Wonderful. So because, I know we got 10 seconds left, I'm going to start calling some out because I know we're going right up to the hour. Great ideas. Start a blog. Way to engage people, way to test out ideas, way to build your thought leadership. You could create a draft proposal within your organization. You could talk to other people about their interests in DEI initiatives. These are fantastic. You all are getting prototypes quicker than most people usually do. You can check out or create a social media group. So with that, I just want to say thank you, Brave Soul, who jumped in. Hopefully you got some useful advice. I know we are coming up on the hour, but totally honored to be here with you all and love the interactivity. I'll turn it back over to Charity Village team for wrapping on up.
Wonderful. Well, I can't thank you enough, Cole. Alexandra, you've just such a great presentation and so interactive. It was wonderful to see all our participants taking part there. And also I wanted to say again, thank you to our volunteer as well. It's great. I just want to remind everyone before we sign off today that you will receive the follow-up email later this afternoon with a link to the webinar recording. We are, as Alexandra mentioned, we will make sure that the link to the Mural app and resources are all there as well, so you'll be able to access all of that. Please do feel free to share this link with your colleagues in your network as well. It's all publicly available. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar, and we'll be sure to share that on with Cole and Alexandra also. So on behalf of Charity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. We do have another session coming up on September 9th that may interest the fundraisers in our group. It will provide an overview of the Certified Fundraising Executive Program, the CFRE program, and how that can help you advance your fundraising career. So you can find more information on this and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thank you all again for taking part in today's presentation. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.